After my husband died, I found a hidden shoebox with a handwritten note that read, in his careful draftsman's script, "Do not trust her." I ignored it, emptied my entire 401k to help my sister-in-law buy a historic bed and breakfast, and signed a promissory note that was supposed to be ironclad. She sold the place for $1.4 million, forged a document declaring my money was a gift, and left me with nothing. Today, I own her family's lake house, and every single guest who books a stay receives an automated email that lists her name as the Involuntary Patron. My name is not what matters. What matters is that I spent over 20 years as an accounting clerk for a mid-size manufacturing firm, the kind of woman who could spot a single misplaced decimal point from across a conference room, who had memorized the entire Article 3 of the Uniform Commercial Code on negotiable instruments by the time I was 38. I taught a free QuickBooks workshop on Thursday evenings at the community center, and that is where I met David. He was a Finnish carpenter with hands that could coax crown molding into perfect compound curves and a quiet habit of listening until you had said everything you needed to say. For 10 years, he was the quiet architect of our life together, building custom bookshelves that fit our living room alcoves to the 16th of an inch and a wraparound porch he never quite finished because he kept adding small, beautiful details. One Tuesday morning, an undiagnosed aneurysm burst in his brain while he was backing his truck out of our driveway. He was 47. I found him slumped against the steering wheel, the engine still running, a half-empty coffee mug in the cup holder with my name written on it in permanent marker, a little heart next to the word. The funeral blurred into casseroles and murmured condolences, a suffocating haze of shaking hands I barely recognized, and flower arrangements that smelled too sweet. Before the dirt had even settled on his grave, the vultures circled. David's younger sister, Rachel, swept into my house with her husband, Mark, a man who always smelled like expensive sandalwood cologne and whose smile never quite reached his eyes. Rachel was the golden child of the family, the one whose failed interior design business their parents had bankrolled 3 separate times, the one who always had a new scheme that someone else ended up paying for. She draped herself across my sofa, sobbing in that theatrical way that leaves no actual tears, saying, "We're here for you now. We'll take care of absolutely everything." Mark was already in the kitchen, flipping through a stack of mail on the counter with wet fingers, murmuring something about logistics and timeline and consolidating assets. They took charge with an efficiency that felt almost violent. I was too hollow inside to resist, too stunned to ask why they needed to involve themselves in every corner of my home. Rachel declared she would sort through David's workshop, a space I hadn't been able to enter since the morning he died. I stood numb in the doorway and watched her pull items off the pegboard with theatrical briskness, dropping them into black contractor bags she had brought. She picked up a dusty old cigar box, the one David's father had used for decades to store his freshwater fishing lures. The wood was worn to a soft patina at the edges. She shook it, heard a soft rattle of paper, and pried the lid open just a crack. I saw her glance at the contents, a faded photograph and a folded sheet, and her face flickered with something dark and fast before she snapped the lid shut. Just old junk from Dad, sentimental garbage, nothing worth keeping. She dropped the box into a trash bag and tied the bag off with a sharp pull of the drawstring. Something in me snapped alert, a tiny thread of clarity through the fog. Later that night, after they had returned to their hotel, I dug the box back out of the bag, my hands trembling. The wood was dry and warm to the touch, the label worn almost invisible. Inside, under a tangle of rusted hooks and a creased photo of David as a boy holding a sunfish, was a single folded sheet of paper. I opened it and recognized David's neat draftsman's lettering immediately, the same handwriting that had left me small love notes tucked into my lunch bag every Thursday for a decade. The note was short and it hit me like a physical blow. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't ever trust my sister Rachel. She has a way of turning people's kindness into her own emergency fund. Save yourself." I read it 5 times, then 6, my heart thudding in the silence of that empty house. The date in the corner was 2 years before he died. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my wallet, a small square of paper I would touch absently whenever doubt crept in. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that a promise made in good faith should never become a weapon used against you. I told myself the note was old, a relic of some forgotten sibling squabble, and that grief distorts perspective. But I kept it close. Rachel and Mark insisted I shouldn't be alone, that I needed to be surrounded by family. They offered to let me stay in the carriage house apartment on their property, a nicely finished one-bedroom above their detached 3-car garage, with a separate entrance, a small kitchenette, and a view of their immaculate lawn. "Sell your place, sweetie," Rachel crooned, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy. "Many memories pressing in on you. Come live with us while you figure out what's next. We'll handle everything just like David would have wanted." I was drowning in grief, desperate for the anchorage of family, so I agreed. A real estate agent listed my house within a week, and a young couple bought it at full asking price, cash. I moved into the carriage house with a few boxes of clothes, my financial files organized in hanging folders, my laptop, and David's tools, the ones I couldn't bear to leave behind. His favorite framing hammer with the leather-wrapped handle, his Japanese pull saw, the small leather roll of lockpicks he had used to teach me the basics after we locked ourselves out of a mountain cabin one autumn. That's when they pitched the dream. A historic bed-and breakfast on Main Street, the Bluebird Inn, had fallen into bank ownership and was available for a fraction of its potential market value. Rachel had always wanted to run an inn, she said, a place where guests felt wrapped in Victorian charm and sipped tea on a wraparound porch. And David, she told me with tears glistening in her eyes that never quite fell, had often spoken of restoring an old house and filling it with music and conversation. He would want you to be part of this. Use the 401k money. We'll all go in together as family. A promissory note, everything perfectly legal. You'll own 20% of the equity and we'll pay you back with interest once the business starts turning a profit. This could be your new purpose, dear, your fresh start. I remembered the note in my wallet. I even pulled it out, unfolded it, and held it up for her to read. Rachel's face crumpled into a studied expression of injury, as if I'd slapped her. "Oh, sweetie, David was so paranoid about money. He wrote that years ago after a silly fight we had about splitting a birthday gift for Mom. You know how he could hold a grudge. He was a wonderful man, but he saw shadows where there weren't any." Mark nodded along, his voice a smooth baritone of reassurance. "He meant well, but he always assumed the worst in people. We're your family now. I'll have my attorney draw up the paperwork, completely ironclad, every T crossed. You'll see." I was exhausted, lonely, and the idea of building something David would have loved felt like the only lifeline I had. I silenced the voice in my head, folded the note back into my wallet, and said yes. I emptied my 401k, all $75,318.42. Early withdrawal penalties and taxes took a bite, but I moved the remaining principal directly into the Bluebird in LLC's new business account at a regional bank. The promissory note was drafted by Mark's attorney, a man named Fletcher who wore monogrammed cufflinks and spoke in dense legalese that smelled of loophole. I reviewed every line with the same forensic skepticism I had used to audit vendor invoices for 2 decades. I made sure the note stated in plain English, principal sum of $75, $318.42, plus 7% annual simple interest, repayable in full within 60 months from the date of funding, and a 20% undivided equity stake in Bluebird in LLC, with full membership rights including access to all financial records. I watched Rachel and Mark sign as managing members, their hands steady and their smiles wide. I signed as a member. I kept the original note in a fireproof lockbox under my bed, and I scanned every single page into a high-resolution PDF that I emailed to my own encrypted cloud storage with a password that was 23 characters long. Then we bought the inn. The first year was a blur of paint swatches, plumbing emergencies, and antique furniture auctions. I built a full QuickBooks file for the business from scratch, linked the bank feeds, coded every transaction to the correct chart of accounts, categorized the renovation expenses as leasehold improvements with a 39-year depreciation schedule, and set up separate classes for each revenue stream, room rentals, events, and the small gift shop. Rachel bought a $12,000 crystal chandelier for the foyer and called it staging. Mark booked a boutique marketing firm on retainer for $5,000 a month. I watched the cash flow statements dip deeper into the red each quarter, but they always had a breezy explanation peppered with terms like growth investment and brand positioning. And you have to spend money to make money. By the end of year 2, the inn was barely breaking even, and I was living frugally in the carriage house, eating canned soup and mending my own clothes, while they hosted dinner parties and traded in their sedan for a brand new Lexus. I started noticing cracks, little red flags that my fraud detection training had taught me never to ignore. My internal alarm system, honed by years of catching padded expense reports and fake vendor invoices, began to ping softly. Mark would take frantic phone calls on the back porch, his voice dropping to a stressed hiss as he paced the flagstones. I caught phrases like balloon payment extension, liquidity event, and once a name I didn't recognize, Horizon. Dodged calls from a number that showed on my own caller ID as a commercial real estate firm started piling up. One afternoon, Rachel snapped at a florist over a billing dispute, and I heard her blurt, "Just put it on the Horizon account, they'll pay it directly." Horizon. That name was not in any of our vendor files or the LLC's chart of accounts. I made a note in my little black book, the one I had used for 2 decades to train junior clerks on how to spot procurement fraud, and I circled it 3 times with a red pen. I started keeping a log, dated, of every odd financial behavior I observed, a contemporaneous record that would later become evidence. Then, in the cold January of 2020, I was walking past the main house to check my mailbox when I heard Mark's voice through a cracked window in his wood-paneled home office. He was on speakerphone, his tone triumphant and almost giddy. "The resort group is in at 1.4. We close Friday. No contingencies. No, the sister-in-law doesn't know a thing. She's too meek to fight. We'll have her sign a gift affidavit after the fact and be done with it. She trusts us. By the time she figures anything out, the money will be offshore." I stood frozen in the brittle winter air, my breath clouding in a white plume. $1.4 million. They were selling the inn out from under me. My 20%, my loan principal, my entire future, was being erased while I stood there like a ghost. The cold bit my cheeks and I didn't feel it. I walked back to the carriage house with my legs moving mechanically, sat on the edge of my bed, and for an hour I just breathed, slow and deep, the way David had taught me when my anxiety spiked. Then I started my engine. I was no longer a grieving widow. I was a forensic accountant with a bone to pick and 2 decades of tools at my disposal. The next morning, while Rachel and Mark left for what they called a property tour, I let myself into the main house. I still had a key from the weeks I'd watered their plants. Their home office was at the end of the hall, a room I'd always been discouraged from entering with vague warnings about sensitive business documents. A tall black filing cabinet stood in the corner with a padlock hanging from the hasp, the kind you can buy at any hardware store, a master lock with a 4-pin tumbler, cheap and vulnerable. I walked back to the carriage house and retrieved the small leather lockpick set from David's toolbox. I remembered the afternoon he had shown me the basics, his calloused fingers guiding my smaller ones as we sat on the porch steps of that mountain cabin. Gentle pressure on the tension wrench, just enough to bind the first pin. Then feel for the click with the pick. Each pin sets one at a time. Patience. I knelt in front of the cabinet, slid the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway, and applied gentle clockwise pressure with my thumb, just a few ounces of torque. Then I took the half-diamond pick and raked it back and forth across the pins, feeling for the subtle give as each driver pin set above the shear line. The third pin bound first, then the first, then the fifth. After about 40 seconds of steady work, the plug rotated with a satisfying mechanical click, and the shackle popped open. The top drawer slid out on smooth rollers as if it had been waiting for me. Inside, a manila folder labeled Bluebird Sale Final. I opened it and found a purchase agreement between Bluebird and LLC and Horizon Hospitality Group, a hotel chain I recognized from their roadside breakfast buffets and beige architecture. The purchase price was listed as $1,400,000, with a closing date set for the coming Friday. The signatures at the bottom were Rachel's and Mark's, listed as sole managing members. No mention of me or my 20%. Behind that document was a notarized sheet titled Affidavit of Gift and Release of Interest. It stated that I, the undersigned, acknowledged that my payment of $75, $318.42 to the LLC was an unconditional gift, and that I claimed no ownership or right to repayment. A signature that was supposed to be mine sat at the bottom like a dead fish. I stared at it under my small pocket magnifier. My real signature has a distinct downward slant to the right, a habit from years of writing on slanted ledger sheets. This one slanted upward, a forced imitation. The loop on my lowercase y always has a little counterclockwise tail, a flourish I copied from my grandmother's elegant hand. This one had no tail at all, just a stubby straight line where the pen had lifted too soon. There was a hesitation dot at the start of the first letter, a tiny ink blob where the forger paused, a classic tell I had learned about in a continuing education seminar on check fraud. I pulled out the original promissory note I kept in my bag and laid it beside the forgery. Night and day, a child could have spotted the difference. I photographed everything with my phone, making sure the notary stamp was legible, the raised seal casting a small shadow, and that the file metadata would show the date and time. Then I replaced the folder exactly as I'd found it, relocked the cabinet with the lockpick set, and slipped out without a trace. Back in my apartment, I went deeper into the documentary record. I pulled up the county recorder's online portal, the same one I had used for title searches when helping friends with refinances. I searched the grantor index under Bluebird and LLC and found a warranty deed recorded 3 weeks prior. The grantee was Horizon Hospitality Group, and the transfer tax stamp confirmed a sale price of $4 million. I downloaded the full PDF of the deed, noting the parcel number and the legal description of the property, which included a meets and bounds description I could trace on a plat map. Then I went to the Secretary of State's Business Records portal and pulled the most recent annual report for Bluebird in LLC. The member listing had been amended 6 months ago, apparently filed electronically by Mark using a digital certificate. My name was gone. Only Rachel and Mark were listed as members and managers. The amendment stated that I had voluntarily withdrawn and relinquished all interest, with a date that fell a full month before I had ever heard the word Horizon. They had forged an entire corporate resolution. I saved every screenshot and every downloaded file in a password-protected folder labeled Evidence, and I backed it up on 2 separate drives. The next step was to confirm the forgery with a qualified expert who could produce an admissible report. I drove 2 hours to the city to meet Lily Chen, a forensic document examiner I had worked with years ago on a corporate embezzlement case where a manager had been faking approval signatures on purchase orders. Her small lab was filled with digital microscopes, infrared cameras, and the quiet hum of analytical machines. I handed her the original promissory note with my genuine signature and a high-resolution scan of the gift affidavit. She spent a full day analyzing the stroke patterns, using a VSC 8000 video spectral comparator to measure pen pressure, stroke sequence, and the infrared reflectance of the ink. Her report ran 12 pages, dense with terms like line quality deterioration, retouching patterns at terminal strokes, baseline drift variance exceeding 3 standard deviations, and atypical pen lifts in non-natural braking positions. She produced color-coded overlay images with red arrows pointing to the hesitation marks where the forger had paused, leaving microscopic ink blobs. The conclusion was brutal in its simplicity. The question signature exhibits dissimilar slant characteristics, inconsistent letter formations, and significant variation in pen pressure profile compared to known standards, indicating a simulated forgery with a 99.9% probability of being executed by an individual other than the writer of the known signatures. I paid her fee with the last of my emergency savings, money I had been hoarding under the floorboard. It was the best money I ever spent. I still needed to understand the full legal picture and see if David had left any other weapon beyond the note. I visited the family attorney who had drafted David's and my wills, a gentle older man named Mr. Patterson, who worked out of a book-lined office that smelled of old paper and leather. I laid out everything, my voice trembling despite the cold resolve building inside me. He listened without interruption, then went to a wall safe hidden behind a landscape painting of a lake at sunset, the same lake where Rachel's family home sat, I later realized. He retrieved a sealed envelope and told me that David had given it to him 18 months before he died, with strict instructions. He said if his sister ever tried to involve you in a business venture, I was to open this and share it with you and the proper authorities immediately. He had a prescience about her that frankly unsettled me. He slid the envelope across the polished desk. Inside was a handwritten letter from David, dated long before any aneurysm threatened him. He wrote about growing up watching Rachel manipulate their parents, how she had cajoled money out of aunts and uncles for ventures that always failed, and how she had recently tried to pressure him into co-signing a loan for a boutique that declared bankruptcy within 8 months. The letter ended with a quiet declaration that changed everything. Because I know my wife's kindness can be exploited, I have, with the help of this firm, embedded a special provision into the Bluebird in LLC's operating agreement. Any amendment to membership, any sale of the property, and any transfer of assets exceeding $10,000 requires the physical, notarized signature of my wife in the presence of 2 independent witnesses from this office. No electronic signature shall suffice. This consent clause is irrevocable and cannot be amended without her identical consent. If anyone attempts to bypass this clause, I authorize Patterson and Associates to file an immediate injunction and freeze all associated funds. He had built a dead man's switch into the very DNA of the business, a brilliant countermeasure that required my living, willing presence for any major transaction to be valid. I wept in that office, not from grief, but from a jagged mix of love and pure electric fury. Mr. Patterson, his old eyes sharp, told me that when the title company received the sale documents, his office had flagged the missing consent and notified the escrow agent. The $4 million from Horizon Hospitality was sitting frozen in an escrow account, unable to be dispersed until I physically signed a valid release. Rachel and Mark were frantic because they couldn't touch a dime of that money without me. The forged gift affidavit was their attempt to bypass that requirement by pretending I had no claim, but it had no legal effect on the operating agreement's clause. The trap was already set. I just needed to spring it. Mr. Patterson put me in touch with the State Attorney General's Office, Economic Crimes Division. Agent Marcus Rivera was a stocky man with tired eyes and a voice like gravel that had seen too many white-collar cases. I walked him through every document, the timelines, the LLC amendment, the gift affidavit, and the frozen escrow. He said they could open a criminal investigation immediately, but to make it airtight they needed an overt act, a recorded admission. If you can get her to talk about the forgery on a recording, we'll have everything we need to charge them with conspiracy, fraud, and identity theft. And we can do it in a controlled setting. He sketched out a plan. I would wear a wire, the Bennetts would be called to a final meeting at a bank to supposedly sign the release that would unlock the money, and the entire thing would be captured on audio and video. I agreed without hesitation. But before we set the trap, I wanted to see just how deep their callousness went, to ignite my own resolve one last time, and to have an unimpeachable video of their character. I staged a medical scare, a test of their remaining humanity. I invited Rachel and Mark over to my carriage house for tea, claiming I had some old family photos to show them. I set out delicate porcelain cups and baked scones, establishing a veneer of normalcy. As Rachel poured sugar into her cup and chattered about a new boutique, I clutched my chest, let my eyes roll back, and collapsed heavily onto the hardwood floor in a precise, practiced heap, gasping in short, ragged breaths. I had positioned my phone on the bookshelf behind a small vase, the camera lens peeking out between 2 paperback novels, recording high-definition video with a clear view of the entire room. Rachel looked down at my shaking body, and her expression was not alarm but cold, irritated annoyance. "Oh, for heaven's sake, not now," she muttered, her voice dripping with venom. She glanced around the room and spotted a manila folder I had deliberately left on my desk, labeled in bold black marker, Bluebird Sale Details Final. Without a moment's hesitation, she stepped directly over my back, her heel grazing my sleeve, knelt by the desk, and snatched the folder. Mark appeared in the doorway, his face as impassive as a statue. "What's going on?" Rachel didn't even turn to look at me. "Get her purse. I need her driver's license. The title company says we need a second government ID to finalize the identity verification before the funds release. She's useless. Just grab it." Mark walked past me, kicked my foot aside as if it were a piece of misplaced furniture, and pulled my purse off the chair. They riffled through it, extracted my wallet, and hurried out, leaving me on the floor, dying. I waited until I heard their car pull away, then I stood up, brushed off my jeans, and stopped the recording. I watched the playback immediately, and the utter lack of a single flicker of concern on their faces, the mechanical way they stepped over a human being they believed was in cardiac arrest, seared something inside me clean away. My heart was a cold, clean blade. 2 days later, Rachel came to the carriage house with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, her voice sugary and urgent. "We have a little bit of paperwork at the bank, just finalizing the debt restructuring on the inn to free up some operating cash. Just a formality, sweetie. You'll be in and out in 5 minutes." I agreed, playing the meek, foggy widow, nodding along. I wore a loose, flowing blouse with a small lavalier microphone clipped inside the collar. Its thin, almost invisible wire running down my side to a transmitter hidden within a tampon sleeve at the bottom of my purse. Agent Rivera had shown me how to do a sound check by softly tapping the mic 3 times, while his technician in a van 2 blocks away confirmed the signal. At the bank, a sleek branch with frosted glass doors and the faint smell of new carpet, we were ushered into a private conference room. A woman I recognized as a notary public and a lending officer, both carefully briefed by Agent Rivera and playing their roles, sat at the polished table with identical pleasant smiles. Rachel produced a thick document titled Ratification of Gift and General Release and Consent to Disbursement. It repeated the lie, stating that my $75, $318.42 was an unconditional gift and that I had no claim to the Bluebird Inn or its sale proceeds, and it also contained a clause purporting to consent to the immediate disbursement of the frozen escrowed funds. There was a fresh signature line with a bright yellow sticky arrow pointing at it. She slid a heavy, expensive pen toward me with manicured fingers. I looked at her, then at Mark, then at the document. I picked up the pen, felt its weight in my hand, held it over the paper for a long, suspended moment, and then I set it down with a soft click. "Rachel," I said, my voice steady as a metronome, quiet but carrying. "I know about the $1.4 million sale to Horizon Hospitality. I know you forged my signature on an affidavit of gift and tried to erase my 20% ownership. I have the original promissory note, the county recorder's deed, the LLC amendment you filed behind my back, and a 12-page forensic handwriting report from a certified document examiner that will be submitted as evidence. But more importantly, the operating agreement requires my notarized, in-person consent for any of this to be valid, and David made sure that consent cannot be forged. The money is frozen until I sign, and I am not signing anything." The silence was absolute, a chasm of shock. Rachel's face went from pink to mottled red to a shade of gray I had never seen on a human being. Mark started stammering something about misunderstandings and family resolutions, and we never met. The lending officer, who was actually a civilian liaison for the Economic Crimes Unit, pressed a silent button under the table. Within 15 seconds, the conference room door opened, and 2 uniformed police officers entered, followed by Agent Rivera himself, his badge hanging from a chain around his neck. He identified himself and said, in a tone of absolute finality, "Rachel and Mark Bennett, you are under arrest for criminal fraud, forgery, and theft by deception. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Rachel let out a shriek that could have cracked the frosted glass, pointing at me, screaming that I was mentally incompetent, that I had forged the promissory note, that I was a gold digger who had tricked her brother. Mark turned the color of old newspaper. Agent Rivera pulled out a small digital playback device and pressed a button. The audio from my wire filled the room, her cold voice from the staged collapse saying, "I need her driver's license for the title company," followed by the entire bank conversation where she presented the fraudulent document. He then played a portion of the video where she stepped over my back. Her lawyer later tried to suppress both, but the judge ruled them admissible as party admissions and demonstrations of consciousness of guilt. They were handcuffed and led out, Rachel still screaming, Mark as silent and gray as a tombstone. The trial took 8 months to arrive. During that time, their defense attorney challenged the forensic report, forcing a second, court-appointed examiner to review everything. That examiner confirmed every single finding, including the hesitation marks and the impossible upward slant. Lily Chen testified for 2 full hours, walking the jury through the color-coded overlay images and explaining concepts like line quality and natural variation, while projecting the signatures onto a large screen. The jury saw the county records proving the sale happened without my knowledge and the LLC amendment that erased my membership. They heard the recording of Rachel stepping over my dying body to steal my identity, her voice utterly devoid of concern. They read David's letter aloud in court, and I watched the jurors' faces harden into stone, several of them blinking rapidly. The deliberation lasted 2 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced them to 5 years in prison, suspended to 2 with supervised release, and ordered full restitution. The court calculated the restitution meticulously, starting with the principal of $75, $318.42, adding 7% annual simple interest from the date of the promissory note until the judgment, plus treble punitive damages under the state's civil fraud statute. The final figure came to $310, $227.18. Rachel and Mark's liquid assets had been depleted by legal fees and the slow unearthing of hidden accounts, but there was one asset they could not quite shield. Rachel had inherited a beautiful A-frame, lake house on Lake Serenity from her parents a decade earlier. She had used a chunk of the fraud money to renovate it, adding a wraparound deck, a hot tub, and a massive stone fireplace. The property was titled solely in her name, free and clear, with a county-assessed market value of $480,000. I filed a judgment lien with the county clerk on that property the same day the restitution order was entered. The lien attached instantly, clouding the title and preventing any sale or refinance without satisfying my debt. When they failed to pay within the 90-day statutory window, I petitioned the court for a writ of execution. The sheriff's office scheduled a public auction on the courthouse steps, posting legal notices in the local paper. I researched the process, learned that I could use a credit bid, meaning my judgment amount would serve as my bid price without me having to bring cash. On the day of the auction, a cold, overcast morning, I stood on those courthouse steps as the only bidder. I bid the exact amount of the judgment, $310, $227.18, and the sheriff's gavel fell with a crack that echoed like a door slamming shut. I took title to the lake house free and clear, satisfaction of the judgment in full. The look on Rachel's face when she learned that her beloved family retreat, the place she had filled with new furniture bought with my money, now belonged to me, was something I carry in my mind like a photograph developed in acid. I spent 6 months restoring that lake house, not with contractors, but with my own hands. I found the finished carpenter tools that Rachel had nearly thrown away in that black garbage bag, the same ones David had used to build our life. I watched old woodworking videos and taught myself to use his Japanese pull saw, its blade so sharp it sang through wood. I rebuilt a rotting window seat, cutting the oak to fit the odd angle with a bevel gauge, just like David had taught me on our own porch. I relayed the herringbone hardwood floor in the loft, board by board, tapping each piece into place with his hammer. I framed new cedar shutters for the outside and stained them a deep honey color. Every hammer stroke felt like a conversation with him. I named the property Promissory Lake House. When I set up the booking software on a popular vacation rental platform, I customized the automated confirmation email with a simple, factual block of text that the platform's settings allowed. Every guest who reserves a stay now receives this message. This property was acquired through a legal judgment against Rachel Bennett, who defrauded its current owner in connection with the sale of the Bluebird Inn. Your stay is partially funded by her involuntary patronage. Read the full public court case here. The link leads to a redacted PDF of the final judgment, with the docket number, the court seal, and her full name listed as the defendant. Rachel's name is now immortalized as the Involuntary Patron on every booking summary, a piece of permanent digital karma that hums quietly in 1,000 inboxes. The lake house stays booked nearly every week, and guests routinely mention the story in their 5-star reviews. They call it the Justice Retreat or the Karma Cottage, and they often leave messages of solidarity that I read on quiet mornings with a cup of coffee on the deck she once thought was hers. I still carry David's note in my wallet, the one that said, "Save yourself." I didn't fully understand it at the time, but now I know he wasn't just warning me about Rachel. He was leaving me a compass, a map to safety written in the kind of fine print only a grieving heart can miss. The truest love sometimes sets a trap for the people who would harm you, a trap built of legal clauses and quiet, deliberate foresight. I run Promissory Lake House with a clear set of books and a deep, reverent appreciation for the power of a well-kept paper trail. Rachel and Mark are out on supervised release, working jobs that don't require access to money, paying down the last of their legal fees and court-ordered counseling costs. I don't gloat. I don't call them. I just let the booking emails do the work, one vacation at a time. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? If you found this story satisfying, hit like and subscribe for more real-life revenge tales built on precision and patience. Until next time, keep your promises and always read the fine print.